And we are live, and I'm hoping everybody can hear me because I'm like having Wi-Fi issues all over the place here. But anyway, today we are fortunate to have with us Chris Ciavarra, who helps leaders of scaling and mature multi-unit retail and restaurant concepts boost growth in his role as the principal consultant at Scotch Game. But Chris and I know each other because we have common history at Cracker Barrel. But we are super excited, Chris, to have you on the show today. And I'm going to pass it over to you and just ask you what's on your mind.
What's on my mind? Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I'm delighted to spend time with the three of you today. And there's a lot of stuff on my mind, right? At the end of the day, I just think, but I thought with this crowd, it would be kind of fun to spend time. And so everybody knows ahead of this, we were all banding about a whole bunch of things, and there's a lot that you could talk about. But at the end of the day, sort of what's interesting to me right now is with everything that's out there, and I'm thinking about the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, I'm thinking about the IPA and CIM, and the list goes on, and Ken DePaul's and Grace Kite and Tom Roy, all this really good information that's out there that should be guiding marketers towards really driving better business outcomes. And yet you don't, at least here domestically in the US, you don't hear that conversation that often. And you don't see those things being employed that often. And so it's just sort of like, why is that? And so I thought it'd be fun today to just talk a little bit about some of that, like what's getting, that even presupposes, I'm not going to say it, why doesn't it happen? Wow. And so I thought we could spend time as a group starting to think about, because really you've all dealt with this in some ways, begin to think through what are probably some of the big rocks, and then we could spend the back half of time talking about in our careers, how have we dealt with those problems?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of interesting just to bandy about. So does that make sense?
Yeah, let's start. So Chris, as you were talking, I'm thinking about sort of two things. One is, and I'd be interested in your take on which of these is the more important. There is. Oh, and please pour yourself a drink.
Not on the floor.
No, the paper's in the printer. I had to get the drink from the.
That's awesome. No, my question is, so there's one set of problems, which is that the reality of businesses don't allow us to do some of the things that, sort of are out there that we could be doing, right? This would be like, there's not enough money, or it takes too long to get the tech stack in place, or whatever, all those kinds of things. So that's one piece. The other side of it is that some of these marketing ideas are so sort of out there that, and they're so theoretical that they don't actually work when you get into, real life. And so I'm wondering if you have an opinion about which of those two is the more important issue.
Well, first of all, I'm not certain I'd buy either of those, to be honest.
Okay, excellent.
So we'll start there. I think your first piece is simply there's a disconnect between, for lack of a better description, size of business and some of those pieces. There could be an argument, but I think different people are dealing at different points, and I think people have kind of unpacked these ideas to say, yeah, those ideas work more in these situations. They're more big business. They're more startup. Where are you on that life cycle continuum? So I think there's that piece. I forget the second piece. So I'm not, for me, and I'll pivot if I can for a minute. I think there's a piece around, do they even understand how marketing works? And like, what is the remit of marketing specifically? And then I see a lot of organizations where it's like so much of business is knowable. Everyone wants everything to be knowable. And a lot of marketing isn't knowable. We've got pieces that are. And so I think there's this sort of like, there's this desire to make everything knowable. And I think that pushes things into things that don't line up with reality at points.
So I want to chime in on that one. And I think in addition to knowable, I think there is a desire to be knowable now, and answered now, and measured now. And what I see very often in my world, and I work in small tech and when in B2B, right? And we reach out to certain businesses, and they sit on my email for 6 months. And then all of a sudden they dig it up and they write back to me, how do I measure? How do I know what's knowable, right? Because from that day 6 months ago until yesterday, I thought I was no good. All of a sudden they dug it up. So our field, marketing, that is very cumulative and very painstaking to some degree. So that's kind of how I feel. Well, what do you think?
I think there's truth in that. And I think that's kind of ties in for me around people are increasingly understanding, for example, that advertising, everyone wants to view it. And yet I think those of us who've done a lot of it know ad stock goes long beyond those windows. And so really, is that even the right way to evaluate some of these things? And should you be thinking about it more as an investment rather than as a cost? Is a piece. So I think I like that addition of the idea of now. Because I think you're right. I think the short-termism is a different place. Is what might contribute to that as well. It probably does contribute to that.
Yeah, so I think there's another interesting factor, and I don't know what you guys think about it, but what often strikes me is everybody knows how to do marketing. It's really amazing how permeating this notion is. Everybody in the organization is a marketer. So is that just me who feels that way, or it's a wider feeling?
It's funny you say that, Elena, because I just feel like that's always true. And of course, I have a brother who is a biotech guy who rogue markets my business all the time. So yes, everybody is a marketer.
Even your brother.
Even my brother.
Yes.
Even my twin
Hey,
brother.
I'm right here, guys.
But you have to give your brother credit that he actually gets some results.
Yes, he does. It does work. But it is, it's interesting because I think I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of people feel like everybody else is in their job all the time. And so maybe that's just a common feeling. But I definitely have had that feeling where, I certainly feel like I'm less likely to assume that I know how a finance person is doing their job or whatever, than it feels like they seem to feel like they know how to do my job. That may just be my perception, right? But I do think you're right. I think there's this belief, because marketing is so, in some ways, so accessible, and because we all consume marketing, that there's this assumption that we know marketing, and there's sort of it gets lost in the.
Well, I think there's also a misunderstanding of marketing. I mean, Jeff, we've talked about this a number of times. I think people do not know what marketing is, and how many times have we come across the oh, we've got a chief marketing officer or head of marketing or whatever, and you find out that they make logos and images for the company. Like that's not marketing. That's creative for marketing, right? That's I think another flip side of it is part of the reason they think they know everything about marketing is because they don't actually know what marketing is.
What do you, Chris? You look like you have a thought on that.
No, I'm asking myself. This is all good, I'm just continuing to get to root causes behind some of these things, and then what can you as a marketer really address, and how can you? Because these are the things that marketers combat every day, which is sort of like pulling you away from business reality into more kind of end of the process type of things. So that's sort of what I was just mulling in contemplating the conversation.
Well, here's the thing that I see all the time in my sort of drug discovery machine learning world, but I also saw it just recently. Was talking to somebody yesterday where I asked them if they wanted to check out, do some work with our favorite digital marketer, Hannah Leitner, and I said to the person who's like, oh, do you want to talk to her? And they said, oh, I spent a ton on digital marketing. It got me nowhere, And so this is a problem I also see is it's especially frustrating in the science realm where it's like one and done, right? I do it once, it doesn't work. Therefore, marketing doesn't work, as opposed to, marketing is an experimental, is an experiment, right? What you need to be able to rapidly adapt and rapidly and this is what we've been doing. I mean, I've been doing it all day for this episode. Like, what does this work? Does that work? And just keep switching. And yet I think people, to your point, Elena, like everybody's an expert, but I think it's also, we expect the experts to be perfect. If they're not, then their whole thing doesn't work.
Let's sit on that for a minute, because I think that is an interesting one, which maybe ties back to my point of being about knowable, and this idea. And so, take restaurants as an example. You've got operators who deal in food and labor costs, and those companies treat those lines like they're levers they can pull, and they think they have tremendous control. If I pull this lever, I'll move this by here and this by here. And I actually sometimes think it's a little bit false, because the reality is they don't really understand that, yeah, you can decrease labor by that much, and for a period of time it will look like this, but at some point it will degrade and fall off, or they don't understand where sort of those things are. So that's what I mean by knowable. The growth space is a lot more unknowable. And so I think for that reason, I think it freaks people out, and they feel like in this very precise world that we keep moving into, we should be able to know things. And then if we can't know things, well, then that's wrong.
Right.
And you're not sophisticated, and you don't know what you're doing, and you don't, versus, no, you're nuts. Like, the parts of the world it's new, it's growth. It's like, it's not knowable. And I think
also a conflation of marketing and sales, right? It's kind of like, I expect to put an ad out there and I'm guilty of this too, an ad out there and immediately get some, leads and people on the hook or whatever. And that's not necessarily what the goal of the marketing is, or it may not be a reasonable outcome.
Just been meaning to talk to you about that, by the way. You're falling short of your goals.
Come on, Eric, I'm going to for you. We're going to restock your pay. I mean, this
is that performance conversation. It's going to happen right now live.
I know, but you're talking my pay. That's right.
I'm sure it'll be a big hit for you. Well, Chris, I mean, it's interesting. Like, do you feel like, so, I mean, for me, it always seems like there's this sort of view of like, so with small companies, part of the problem is they look at marketing and they're looking at what the big players are doing. And so they're like, I like small restaurant companies. Like, I was talking to a small restaurant company a while back, and they were like, we're spending whatever, I don't know, it was like tens of thousands of dollars on an influencer campaign. And I'm like, I'm not sure why you would do that, because you're only in, like, this is a small chain that was basically in a very, small geography. And I'm like, you probably would have been better off just, going to the local church, and you would have found all these influencers or whatever, for your restaurant. And so, but they're sort of seeing like everybody else is doing search, and I need to, I need my website to be optimized for search and whatever. And it's like, but if you ask the question to them, like, how much of your business is actually coming, through your website, through whatever, the answer is generally for small businesses is none. In which case, like, all of that stuff is interesting, but it's probably not the best place right now to spend that money. And so you get these people, at least that are building businesses, starting to feel like marketing doesn't really work. But the reason is because you were doing the wrong marketing for the situation you were in.
I see the same thing, where I see small companies using big company, or trying to use big company playbooks. I was talking to somebody this morning, and they get it. There's 6 units. They're doing grassroots stuff. They get it. They're around the community. They're punching in. They're doing all that kind of stuff, and they're doing well. And so I think companies, yes, the game changes as you move along, what you're dealing with, and then how you're going to attack and approach that at the end of the day. So I see the same thing. So, Elena, were you going to say something? I thought you were.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question, like, specific to restaurants. The interesting trend that I see is that the generation of our kids sees eating out in restaurant experience completely different from us, right? to at least to my kids, they want to experience it all the time. To them, eating home food is an exception, and eating out food should be the rule, no matter how hard I fight it, right? So when you do marketing for restaurants, to what degree do you or your clients tap into this trend? Is this trend something just happens in my house, or is it true? And how do they tap into it?
So you're asking me to basically comment on the quality of your cooking. That's what you're asking me to do here on a live stream.
Right. Yeah.
I just want to be clear about.
Comment on the quality of my cooking. Stick to restaurants, okay?
I just thought I thought I would go against that. I don't know. I haven't seen any data. I mean, I think the four of us know at the end of the day, restaurant consumption is always higher amongst younger people. At the end of the day, you certainly have generations that continue to grow up more on the move than perhaps like I was at their age in terms of out and about and doing activities. And so a lot of food is on the run. So I think you see that. Clients that I deal with, we don't really talk about it so much from a generational standpoint. It's more around what are the trade areas you're in, who are the audiences around that, how is the concept built specifically, and for whom and for what occasions. Is more what I see. But I think right now what's going to be interesting, and I mean, I think we're all living through it, is what continues to happen on the cost lines, and that you're beginning to see at some point, not beginning to see, you're seeing some shift back into either trading down. So I used to buy this, now I buy this, or you're seeing people trade out, and the trade out of going back into grocery. And so that'll be interesting. That's the piece that'll be interesting to me to see vis-a-vis the kids is, at some point, especially your kids are still in the house, obviously, but they get out of the house and they're 25 and they can't go out to eat, but they could have that bowl. I remember the bowl of cereal, which is still really a cool thing when you come home from work and you just don't want to eat. You want a quick snack, but that's, so I don't know. That was a long-winded answer.
We had a serial entrepreneur on the other day, actually.
Oh. All right. I feel like this is the moment where I should tell you that ChatGPT. And so, Chris, the last couple of episodes, I asked ChatGPT, what's a funny question to ask our guest? And I don't know, ChatGPT is not terribly funny today. Like, for example, its first one was, how many marketers does it take to change a light bulb and then optimize its ROI? That's all it says. I mean,
and the answer to that question would be 0.
Right?
Marketers don't change light bulbs.
Like, that's not funny. ChatGPT.
Right. I would just argue the answer to that question is 0. That would be the funny part.
Right. Can I ask a legit question though? So you guys talked about tech early on. Is it like, is it the tech, Jeff? I think you mentioned, like, is it the tech that's holding back people? And I'm just wondering, like, Chris, do you think that everybody has to shift to the high tech, or are tried and true marketing approaches like still in play? Are people just sort of attracted to the shiny object, and that's why they think they have to do the whatever it is, the fancy thing, or is there or is there something to it?
So first of all, somebody touched on this earlier. It was either Jeff or Elena, which is the process of deduction, right? But somebody
knows is what he does on
mine. Yeah, or it's that fifth person on the call who we can't. All right, total sidebar here. I was on a call this morning with somebody, and it was on a FaceTime, and the FaceTime was automatically giving thumbs up and balloons.
Oh yeah, Elena does that. Elena, give it a try. See if that works still.
What is it? Is that some new AI overlay that it's
no, not on StreamYard. I have it on my Google Meet, I guess, or Team.
We sometimes get these bursts of fireworks or something. Anyway, sorry, Chris.
Just one last piece. It's fascinating, just because it was sort of like, is there another person on the call? Because I feel like certain points are being punctuated, like, yes, we should do that. You're like, okay.
Well, I was on a call the other day with this guy that I work with, and I don't know, he was like gesturing to show something, and it like turned this gesture into a heart.
Right.
Like heart.
I wonder if from a marketing perspective, if you could just have it be like, okay, if I sell my like thumbs up to you, does that, allow you to put your logo, right? Like, Pizza Hut or something like that, like bursts into the...
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to your question, because your question touches on my open. And I think it is And I think there's a couple pieces in it. One is this idea was probably a fear of missing out. One, two is just bucking the crowd. And at some point it's just easier to say, well, everybody else is doing it, we're going to do it too, because you're like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill at some point. You're like, and so it's easier to do. I'm not going to say any given channel is good or bad. I mean, at the end of the day, it's sort of like your audience, your occasions, your this, your that. What I think is increasingly interesting is that some marketers, was two pieces here. One is there's a whole generation of marketers who haven't grown up with that other toolkit. And we're talking just comms right now. So it's completely foreign to them, which is going to be interesting because as the cost of some of those specific things come down, radio, print, direct mail, you're actually getting to a point now where you go, actually, that's a better way to reach somebody.
Right.
Right. It's really interesting. And yet they're viewed, Eric, to your point, they're viewed as, well, why would you do that? So I did. It's like, because I can reach my audience really inexpensively. I can hold attention better. I can brand better. I can I don't know, those seem like good reasons to me. So I would like, but I think this is what you're raising is one of the things I was trying to open with, which is marketers, good marketers know what to do. Why aren't they doing it?
Right.
And there's a political reality that they're running into, which is, I think, is what you're talking about. There's a resourcing, and then there's this lack of clarity in the organization around your role. Like, what the hell is your role? Well, I'm sorry, I'm not the coloring in department.
Well, I also think that there may be one other factor, and that is doing something creative and out of the box requires one, thinking, and two, a ton of work. Because you have to go against the grain, convince somebody to do it, convince somebody to give you money. They don't want to give you resources. Chances are you got either resource or do it yourself, right? And by the time you even travel down that road, you say, oh my God, forget it. I'm just going to send an email, right? Because the good quality work requires determination and dedication, and not every.
You're also asking people, and I think you touched on this, Elena, you're also asking people to take a huge risk because, as I said before, this is whole one and done, it failed, that was stupid. Well, it might not have been stupid, it might just not have worked, but you might have been onto something. You might have had, it might have been a worthwhile experiment, but everybody loves to pile on. And then you've actually taught the people not to be creative because it risks, depending on, level of trust, et cetera, in your organization or whatever, a lot of people don't appreciate the risk taking as being, occasionally when the risk works, it gets big traction and then everybody wants to try it, but then it's not creative anymore. It's just,
the other thing, Eric, I mean, like the average tenure, I don't know, I'm going to make a number up here, but it's probably about right. Like the average tenure of a CMO these days is about they last about 18 months or something like that, or, whatever. And it's, it's partly because people expect these. I mean, 18 months isn't even enough time to figure out a new brand campaign and understand where it works, whether it's working or not. But, we sort of give up on people really quickly. So I think you're right. It's hard to take risks, not just because of the work, but just because, why should I take a risk when I won't just do the things that are sort of, kind of the base things. But it is interesting. I will say, when I first got to Cracker Barrel, one of the things I thought was really interesting was if I messed with the TV or the billboards, people freaked out. But I could basically do almost anything I wanted on the digital channels because nobody was paying attention. And so, and of course, I'm not a digital marketer. I had an amazing digital marketer who is, she's leading marketing there now, and she's terrific. But but she really transformed the way we were doing marketing, partly because nobody was really paying that much attention to the digital marketing pieces, and so we could try things and do things and see what worked and so forth.
Can I tell you funny? We're just gonna go talk shop for a minute. Just I get a drink, do something. So I don't know if I ever told you this, Jeff, but so for everybody else knows, Cracker Barrel, I don't know if they still are, it used to be a top 10 billboard advertiser in the country. Over 1,500 billboards, gazillions of them. And it was a big part of the marketing mix at the end of the day. And it consistently through MMM showed it worked great. So when I first got there gazillions of years ago and was working through a whole creative change, and at the time the company was doing creative changes, and the company's based in Nashville, around Nashville, because there's enough inventory around here you could just do it and you could drive it. I was like, I'm not doing that, and I moved it all out to Knoxville because I didn't want the feedback. And because another was like, did you know? I'm like, yes, I know. I'm gonna fix it. Like I can't. Like I mean, because you what's on the piece of paper and what goes up on the street sometimes don't match, and so you get it and you go, that doesn't work. I got to change it. Which is I just think is equally interesting, right? Which maybe also is another piece, Elena, to your point, like people are risk averse, and that it's become, in a lot of places it's small ball, it's not big ball. Nobody's taking the big risks. It's sort of like we're going to take little incremental things along the way, which I talk with clients about just a series of bets. Do you have basically, are you trying, your singles, your doubles, and your home runs, and how have you chosen how to allocate across those things? But being really intentional with that, so that because otherwise they tend to just fall into either all they want are home runs or all they want are base hits. Right. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, home runs are fun. There's no doubt about it. They're fun.
Yeah.
But
that's not, that's not like, it's a little bit of like, you gotta understand really like yes, it's very cool to have some big splashy thing happen, but most of the time that happens by total accident. And so what you really need to be focused on is how to do the right things to really move the business. I will say, I just have to jump in with a billboard story of my own, which is occasionally when I used to work in the CPG world, what you would do is you would actually buy one billboard in Bentonville, Arkansas, and
yes.
I wonder why.
And you just make sure you hit that right. That's probably the most expensive billboard in the country, is probably that one on the way to
That's the Super Bowl of billboards.
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Walmart. Like you want to get like the people driving into work every day.
I see.
You want them to believe that you're putting adequate support behind whatever it is that they have, and you're going to show up in their face.
Right.
Okay, so marketing inside jokes aside that I don't follow, my question to you is flipping it on the other side of the spectrum is, what are, particularly from the sort of smaller company perspective, what are the low-hanging fruit marketing things that people don't do, and you just, when you look at a company and you're like, what? Or you're first introduced to a small company, whatever, why don't you do X? Like, this is the simplest, cheapest, thing to do. And, we talk about, having the podcast, but, podcast is not the simplest thing. It's not, I'm not saying it's a rocket science, but it takes a little bit of planning and whatever. Right. What's the low hanging fruit? What's the easiest thing I could do to?
Oh, sure. Easiest. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's just as simple as that, right? This gets it. See, look, he's literally doing, this is exactly, you're illustrating the point. You're actually, well done, Eric. Really well done. You just
set you up.
Illustrated, maybe you just illustrated, and I mean this lovingly, like the idea of just, well, it's just, if it was that simple, we would just all do it. And so it is interesting. So I just does that make I think it's interesting in terms of what you said. There is no one, but I'll offer a few things that I feels like I talk with clients about a bunch. One is, especially for really small ones, and they should do this, right, is they tend to be heavily into Facebook and Google and all those things, and that's fine. They tend to be very rational in their offers. And so at some point, can they introduce more emotion into what they're doing and generate more of an emotional response out of people in some portion of their messaging, I think is really good. The second thing is they don't tend to have clarity on their message. Exactly like what occasions are you trying to solve for, and how do you connect? They don't tend to, it's sort of like, I don't know, this and that. I'm like, great, but what key buying occasion are you trying to connect back to? So we work on that. So that's a piece. In some case, so those are on the more marketing communication side. Sometimes it's around just optimization of offer, and specifically the offering, and thinking about what are other channels that we could get this into. Really, because like you're already building it, you're already doing it. So like, let's just take a restaurant as an example. Depending upon your trade location, like, do you actually narrow down your menu and drive more distribution channels? So do you have an air screen? Do you have to go? Do you have third party? And those things, because that way it's like your team is producing fewer of the same thing. They tend to produce it better. You tend to reduce your costs more, and you can drive it in more places. And the physical distribution works back to driving mental, blah, blah, blah. So that's a little bit further, but that's a piece that like sometimes they just don't. And it's to Elena's point, it's work. It's extra work. Core business, new business. That new business, like people don't understand, you're standing up a whole other business.
Right.
Yep. And in the beginning, and maybe it's another piece, like culturally, the people who end up running the business are different than the people who grew the business.
Yeah.
People who grew the business kind of like, well, I'll just try it. It'll work. Like that type of mindset. And like, I might have to work this weekend and up versus the people who tend to run the business sometimes are fantastic at systematizing and getting it to run consistently. But they may not have that same level of appetite for that level of variability. Back to my comment around knowable.
So I just want to point out that we have hit our half an hour. That went by extremely fast. It was really great conversation. Thank you, Chris. We always go around and give a one thing that we thought was interesting or learned or want to emphasize. And we always start with the guest because it gives them no time to think about it. So,
while the rest of
I always go last so that I have a long time to think about it. So go ahead, Chris.
So now I'm going to impugn Eric just for fun, Jeff. You ready? Because of what he said about you at one point. You can have as much time as you want, Eric. It still won't solve the underlying problem. Oh, that was a little mean.
Wow.
A little mean. I don't mean it.
Well, you definitely just took the meanest guest.
Thank you.
Or the sickest burn. Let's call it the
Thank
sickest
you.
burn.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So, gosh, what's one of the things that I'm walking away with?
Or that you want to emphasize?
Oh, I want to emphasize. Well, it's real. Let's start there. At the end of the day, I don't think the marketing community has a good handle on it. I really do wish. I read something at one point, somebody pretty senior within the sort of business community, and it was sort of like, marketing needs to do a campaign of marketing for itself. I'm like, that's daffy. Because it's like, but at some level, I really do wish that there was greater clarity at the board and CEO and CFO level about how this stuff really works. Mm-hmm. And to Elena's point, what it takes. And I've been most successful, I think, when I've had a leader behind me who provided me a bit of aegis is part one. I'll go back to Cracker Barrel one more time, Jeff, because you'll appreciate this. These people remain unnamed, but when I first got there, people would people would take pot shots at marketing, right? It's like, always take pot shots at marketing and that type of thing. And I said to my peers, I said, you're done. You can't do that. Like all you're doing is you're ripping down the department. You want to play? Poke fun at me. That's fine. Right. Call me what you want. And they called me a lot of things. But I think creating that environment is probably pretty important as well. But I do think it's something that I actually worry, maybe to Elena's point, that if we don't figure out how to create the right culture around these things, then it's just going to stymie growth. And that just causes me more broadly causes me concern. So, do I get to hand the puck to somebody, or how does that work?
Hey, Eric will MC us.
I'll kick it over to Jeff this time. Go for it.
So, Chris, before I give my thing, how could people get in touch with you?
Let's see. They can call, they can write, they can smoke signal. The easiest thing to do would just be to go to LinkedIn, look for my profile, and that will either take you to a DM or to my website, and then you can work from there.
Awesome. I think for me, and is just this point of like, fundamentally, there's lots of different things you can do with marketing, but in the end of the day, there's just this very important thing that you have to make sure you remember and understand, which is like, where is your money coming from? Right? Who are you actually selling to, and how do you talk to them? How do you talk to more of them? How do you expand that group? I mean, that's the fundamentals of marketing, and I think all of the technology and all that kind of stuff is sort of builds on top of that. But so that's sort of my takeaway, was that, you just have to really remember there's fundamental things here that, everything else is just sort of tactics, if you will. I will pass it over to Elena.
Oh, I just learned that I'm a lousy cook.
No.
You go, Eric.
No. It's not that you're a lousy cook. It's that you haven't been marketing it to your children well enough.
That's exactly.
Tell them this is the best tasting healthy food you're going to have all week. No,
Yeah, cucumbers.
Anyway, all right, Eric.
All right. Well, Elena, I was leaving space in case you wanted to say other things, but what I take away from is that it's sort of an was the part where Chris was talking about. It's not just the shiny object. It is kind of all of the above, and different channels are going to work well in different situations, and it really depends on your audience. And there's just a tendency for everybody to want to do what the big guys are doing, but that doesn't mean that you should just completely ignore, the radio, the print, etc. This was a fantastic conversation, Chris. We enjoyed having you, and if we all get together in real life, I volunteer to cook in case. I suspect Elena's cooking is great.
I suspect it's pretty good too. I would be more than willing to have Elena's cooking.
Oh, no issues. That is just very funny.
All right, awesome. Great to have you. And see you next time.
We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.